Good morning everyone, welcome to my channel. I am the Cyber Guru, and today we're going to do a quick tutorial using Fusion 360 and Simplify3D to show you how to create a vase and then ultimately slice it and print it. So let's get started. Here I have Fusion 360 pulled up. First thing we want to do right off the bat is change our units into millimeters. The STL format doesn't specify units, and many of the slicer programs just assume millimeters, so if you do everything in inches, the part will come out very, very small on your build platform, and then you have to do the conversion at that point, so it's easier just to start in millimeters. So right off the bat, the first thing we want to do in Fusion is actually create a sculpt or a form. I have it on my toolbar right here, but you can also go down here and say create form. It's going to warn you. Click OK, and you are now in the sculpt environment. The first thing we want to do is create a sketch. We're going to create the sketch here on our vertical axis. That tells us that this would be our build platform, and then we'll build up from here. So next thing, we want to create a spline on the axis. So we're going to start near the bottom here and kind of create a nice vase-like structure. Like that, looks pretty interesting. One thing that I have learned is that it is best to make sure that this bottom arc here is perpendicular to the bottom plate. It makes for a better print. And better adhesion to the base here ultimately. And then we also want to create a line from the bottom of our spline to our center point here, and I'll explain that in just a minute. And I'm just going to manipulate some of these angles a little bit to give us more interesting kind of output here. So move this guy down a little bit. I don't know why this guy will move, but I guess we want to do a genie-like looking base. And as you can see here with the handles on the splines, you can manipulate the angles and the arcs of the splines by pulling and dragging. Pushing will increase. Decreasing the size of the handle will decrease the size of the arc, as you can see here. This is the actual circle that is basing the arc off of, and then pulling will make it larger, and you'll get a bigger, sort of more sweeping arc. This seems reasonable to me. I'm going to actually pull this guy over a little bit. Maybe line it up with that vertical axis there. Seems pretty good to me. Alright. And once you're out of the sketch mode here, you can still manipulate the points here, but what you cannot do is manipulate the arc. You have to go back into the sketch mode to move the points around, or to manipulate the arc and the lines. Which is easy to do, and you can do it at any point, even after you create your actual form or your mold. Alright, so that looks fairly interesting. We will now create our form by going under Create and selecting Revolve. Now what Revolve does is it actually takes this arc that we will select and then allows us to select an axis, and it'll actually create the form around the axis that we asked it to. We have a pretty nice looking vase there. Couple options here. You can have the faces aligned uniformly across the device, or you can have it follow the curvature here. I do have a tendency to like to follow the curvature. Makes manipulating it later on a little bit easier. And the number of faces here from a horizontal perspective are the number of 8 faces across here, and then 16 vertically across the top. I like to have a little bit more across the top for creating things like this, because it adds a little bit more visual interest when we get to the next step. And we'll show that right now. So what we have again, is our completed vase with a nice flat bottom, make it nice and easy to 3D print. What we're going to do is manipulate the form a little bit. So under Edit Form here, you have a couple options: manipulating the vertex, the edges, the entire face, or obviously the entire body. So we're going to stick with the edges here, and we're going to show pull and press some of the vertices in to give it a little bit more visual interest. So if you right click, it'll select the edge. If you double right click the edge, it'll actually select the entire sort of profile there. Now when we're doing this, what we don't want to do is we do not want to manipulate the bottom. So we will right click, shift right click on that, and it'll deselect that bottom edge right there. So we have a pretty good edge here. And I am going to pull this in about 5 millimeters or so. And what you can see is it pulled the entire edge and created a nice little sort of bump in the middle. And so I am going to do that for all of the 4 primary vertices here. Another 5 millimeters. We'll pull that in just to create a little visual interest in the vase itself. And so what you can see is a kind of nice square vase instead of a round one now, a nice sort of lip here. And so now to add just a little extra interest to it, what we're going to do is we're actually going to twist the vase a little bit. I've had mixed success with this, to be quite honest with you. If you get overlapping forms, it causes some problems. So we're going to try and avoid that if we can. So back into modify mode, we're going to leave it set on edges. We are going to drag click to select the edges. Do a quick rotate. Sometimes you can see here Fusion doesn't get all the edges, so we want to shift drag click to make sure all the edges we want are selected. Alright, it looks like everything from the top half there is absolutely selected. And we'll go back to the top. We'll grab this, but before we were grabbing here, which is pulling either vertically or horizontally. Now we're going to change the angle here. We're going to put, let's say, 25, we'll go 30-degree twist. Now you can see now is it's actually twisted the vase. Just the vertices that we've selected, or the edges that we selected. So it took the entire top half and twisted it from the bottom. And this is why it's important to get all the edges selected, because if you don't select an edge, it'll actually overlap the faces, which will not create a form that you're looking for. Just a little bit more, and we're almost there. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're just going to do it for the top half of the form. Again, creating a little bit more interest. Make sure that we have, oops, we got to go into our edit mode. Forgot about that. It looks like we have all the edges selected. Looks pretty good. And then we're going to continue with our twist another 25. Looks good. So now what you have is a double twist, slightly different angles, kind of deformed in the middle here. Looks kind of interesting, kind of cool. Alright, and you can keep manipulating this as much as you would like. But for now, I think we're good. We're going to click Finish Form, and boom, now we have our solid form in Fusion. We can export that to our heart's content. So, alright, so that's easy. Let's go ahead and make it. We are going to click on the Make button, select our device, and we're going to go into, we're going to name it Bowl Workflow here. Where is my STM, what you going to call it that? We'll replace the one that we have, that's fine. Alright, that's it for Fusion. Excellent. So now let's switch over to Simplify3D, and we can import our bowl workflow. Boom, there you go. You can see because we selected a vertical plane and we created a nice flat bottom, it just lines it up right on the bottom. So it's super simple. One thing about Simplify3D, it does have some issues rendering some of these very thin sort of parts, but as you rotate around, you can see it's all there. Just doesn't show it on the back side. Not entirely sure why that's the case, if it's just the software that on this particular platform or not. So next, in Fusion, or I'm sorry, in Simplify3D, we want to add our process. I'm using the Prusa i3 Mark II printer, so that's the profile we have. To create a vase, very simply, we go into layers. We make sure that our top layer is set to 0 so that it doesn't put anything across the top. Bottom layer, I like to have 3. You can use as many as you like, 3, 4, 5. I would not go lower than 2. You certainly don't want to do 1. You will have some issues getting it off the build platform. So 3 is a nice compromise between print time and rigidity. So outline and perimeter shells you want to set to 1, and to get the actual vase mode, the continuous one single print line printing, is you select the single outline corkscrew print mode, otherwise known as vase mode, and that's it. That's all you need to do. Here I'm actually printing in 0.2 millimeter resolution, which is a pretty good resolution to print something like this in. So very simply, just print, select prepare to print, and there is your vase. And it's been fully sliced. Go down to the bottom here, show you, zoom in a little, show you some of the layers building up from the bottom, and then the spiral pattern you can actually see here as it's spinning around layer by layer. It's a single perimeter thick, and it builds up. You can actually see a little bit of the transparency that you get with the single mode. You can see how it's kind of transparent here. And the final output, depending on the color you print in, is actually pretty similar. You can pretty much see through it. It adds a very, very interesting output. So all the way to the top, and it kind of flares out at the top. Very cool. Very interesting. And you can see here, print time is only 1 hour and 11 minutes. So using the vase mode, it prints very, very quickly. And so let's save this guy. I'm going to replace that guy, and I just want to show you real quick, if we were to make one simple change to the layer and add some 3 perimeters, just nothing didn't change anything else, prepare to print. Whoops, nope, we want to go back and turn off vase mode. Sorry about that. There you go. Love Simplify. It warns you when you're making simple mistakes like that. Prepare to print. And interestingly enough, the print time did not go up. I find that very hard to believe. But you can see now the 3 perimeters. Yeah. And the full base. Alright, it still says the print time is 1 hour and 11 minutes. I don't know that I believe that. I'll be honest with you. So we'll have to, maybe we'll have to print both of them, see what happens. Let's put this guy, and we're going to say this one is 3 prims. Alright, exit. So that's how you create the vase in Simplify3D, and we're going to now send this off to the printer, and I'll do a quick time lapse of that, and show you the output once it's done. Alright, we'll see you in a bit. Okay, so here we are. We're back. We have sent the vase off to the printer. It looks amazing. We'll give you a little, you saw the time lapse there, so we'll give you a little preview of the vase right here. I'll give it a little quick turn. It's got some really nice features to it. It's got that the bump that we added right there, and if you can see it there, I'll turn it a little bit. We got the little insets. It's probably better if you see it from the bottom right here. And then we got the twist, which looks amazing. I think it turned out fantastically. I got to tell you, I can't rave about the Prusa enough. There's been about a bunch of videos. Joe Telling and Tom have done some videos about it. It is really an amazing printer. I've had a little bit of experience with others, and this one is definitely a great device. As you'll see here, we printed it in vase mode. It's very thin. Turn it off here, you can see. And you can also see how you can see through it. It's translucent. It looks amazing in the light. So that's our device, our vase. I'm going to print the 3 perimeter one to validate the times that was provided by the Simplify3D. And then we'll move out from there. So thanks. We'll be right back. Okay, so while our 3 perimeter vase is printing, I want to play around a little bit with these settings in Simplify3D. Typically, when you expand the number of perimeters, it actually expands the print time. So what I would like to do is click on my my vase here. If you double click it, it'll actually bring up this little pop-out window here, which will allow you to scale it. And so what you see here is right now it's at 100%. So I'm going to blow it up a little, 200%. I have it set to uniform scaling here, so it'll actually scale all of the axes in the same manner. And so it's a little bit bigger, twice as big, as a matter of fact. And so I'll go back into the process here, and what I would like to do is just compare and contrast a little bit. So 3 bottom layers, 1 perimeter, vase mode again, and click prepare to print. What we'll see here, 2 minutes and 27 2 hours and 27 minutes, sorry. And just do a quick slider on this. You can see that it's growing as you would expect. Go back in here and select, we're not going to do the vase mode, but instead we're going to do 3 perimeters. Oops, there we go. No top layers, as you would expect, and prepare to print. So 227 was the previous print time, and you see here 330. So the print time has gone up by roughly a third or so. Not sure how to characterize that. About an hour or so. But definitely same model, different size, but the perimeters now, because there's 3 of them, it's gone up by about an hour or so. So that's what I want to show before, that increasing number of perimeters definitely increases the print time. I will also just show you a simple thing where if you add a simple 1 layer, 1 to the bottom layer, and you prepare to print here, and slice, you'll notice here that it went up by a fair amount of time, about 15 minutes or so, compared to the previous time. But the most important, so that was 3 hours and 35 minutes. If you were to add another perimeter on this and click prepare to print, what you will see is a dramatic increase in the amount of time, an entire hour to add another layer. And so some of the contributing factors there really is the amount of extra print that has to happen around the perimeter here. And so even though you would think that adding a lot of extra layers here on the bottom would increase your print time, because of the height of this device, of this print, the number of perimeters makes a significant difference. Just increasing it by 1 from 3 to 4 has added almost an entire hour to the print time, increasing it by about 25% from a print perspective. So it's very interesting. It's something to keep in mind when you're printing. 3 is pretty reasonable. 4 is also fairly reasonable in my opinion. If you're getting up into 5 and 6 from a perimeter perspective, You really have to ask yourself whether or not that's worth the extra print time. So that's all I have to say here for right now, and you can hear the printer working off in the background. It should be done in about another 20-30 minutes or so, and we'll show the 3-perimeter print at the original size as opposed to the double up size, which is what we have here, 200%, as compare and contrast to the vase mode version of it. And we'll see how it turns out. All right, so thanks. We'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we're back. Hey, the 3-perimeter vase printed fantastically, as I was expecting. You can see it here. Let me get it in front of the camera. Again, it's from a geometrical perspective, it's identical to the vase print. You'll see here that it is a little bit thicker. Obviously, 3 perimeters, and it doesn't quite have the rigidity, or the lack of rigidity, I should say. If I squeeze it here, it doesn't have any of that flex that you would see in the single vase mode, but it looks fantastic, as the previous one did. One thing, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but if you can see, so turn it in here. You see this line right there? There's a line that goes all the way down. You can see it kind of corkscrews all the way down through the entire print. And there's a very subtle, on the outside, a very subtle line. And so there's a little bit of an offset between the inside perimeter here and the outside perimeter, and it created this kind of corkscrew line, which I'm not entirely sure where it came from. And that's a new one for me. But that's the trials and tribulations of printing things. So we'll have to get into that. But what I will tell you is, honestly, printed at the same time. It was about 1 hour 22 minutes, which is what the other one printed at. If you factor in the heating time, which is about 7-8 minutes, Simplify3D was nearly spot on, which with their estimate. The bottom here is still 3 layers. I will tell you that, at least with this print anyway, I would probably use a little bit more, but it's nice and solid. Given the print time the same as the vase mode, this is the way to go. I gotta tell you, 3 perimeters, absolutely. It's much more solid. It's got the kind of construction you want. Doesn't quite have, you can see in the light here, it's got all the bumps, but you can't see through it as much. In fact, you can't really see through it at all, as it turns out. So if you're looking for that kind of translucent, as opposed to transparent or even opaque, maybe not the way to go. But for general sort of devices, I gotta tell you, I'm super impressed with this. I'll have to get into the why it's got a line in here, but overall, super impressed. Again, to Joseph Prusa, rock on, brother. That's the way to go. So there you go. So that's the 3 perimeter. Simplify3D didn't lie to me. I thought maybe it had, but it didn't. So that's it. This is the end of the video. So I really appreciate everyone watching this. And if you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give it a thumbs up. Just saying. And we'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks.